Greetings, students. I'm going to talk to you about the history of Surrealism and how that history continues to play out in contemporary art and pop art. And hopefully, we will use some of the Surrealist strategies in our first project that you're going to paint. So, I'm going to have you dive in to the history of Surrealism. Um, so the Surrealists formed in Paris in um, between World War One and World War Two in the early 1930s, and you can see by the photo on the left and the photo on the right, it was a large group of men, but there were a lot of women surrounding the movement, and in these days, people are extremely interested in the women that were in the Surrealist group. So I will be showing you a lot of paintings by them. So they definitely were reacting to the oncoming threat of Nazism, and you'll see they were kind of the first group of artists that used that had access to cameras and used cameras to create their image kind of the way that you guys do now with something like Instagram, but they were playing with creating their own mythology about themselves. And the photo on the right was a collage they made, and the surrealists were always looking for that dreamlike feeling of um, what it's like to be asleep and you have wild dreams, and the unconscious mind kind of having a life of its own. So in the picture on the right, you see a collage, and it's all photos of them with their eyes closed, like they're sleeping. And then what are they all dreaming about? They're all dreaming about the naked woman in the middle. So there, at the time, there was a level of sexism in the culture, and that kind of plays out in the images that they make. So the whole group was led by this guy, Andre Breton, and here's Salvador Dali, and you can see he's very young. Max Ernst, he shows up. A few of these guys are poets, and some are writers and photographers. At sort of the same time, um, in Germany, we have artists that are starting to experiment with photography and photo collage, and this is the artist John Hartfield, and he is making anti-Hitler sort of political cartoons, and he these look a lot like Photoshop does now, but they're made with like very intense layering of um, negatives and dodging and burning, and made with actual gelatin silver prints. So he was like really an artist in the darkroom. And what Photoshop does now is kind of approximate what he was inventing in photography, but you see this idea of combining images to make new meaning that wasn't there in the past. And there's another artist from Germany people are very interested in. Both John Hartfield and this artist Hannah Hawk, they come from the movement that is called Dada. And Dada was kind of about nonsense, and because they had just come through World War One, and like war did not make sense to them. And the Dada artists, they really did influence the surrealists because they started making these like nonsensical collages, and they invented the idea of assemblage of just like taking junk and building collages out of things to make sculpture. And so you'll see a lot of that sort of weird clash of images coming together here. And it definitely had an effect on the surrealists. Hannah Hawk is interesting because she started working with images from women's publications, and um, she definitely was like questioning the idea of the how women are constructed and feminism and the power of women. So you see some interesting things coming from her. Um, and then we have people like Frida Kahlo. We were looking at her in class, and Frida, obviously, through newspapers and magazines, became familiar with what was going on with surrealism in France. And even though she was in Mexico, she like saw the images of the paintings, and she was like, I can do that, and I can do that better. So she started making her own images, and she is definitely using the surrealist strategies for making things dreamlike. And in this one, I'm going to introduce to you this idea of levitation. So in a surrealist painting, often there is no gravity and things start to float. And you can see Frida is even making a nod to the surrealist because she's painting herself sleeping with the vines on the cover coming to life. So she's very interested in the surrealist paintings. I'm going to switch to Dorothea Tanning. And Dorothea Tanning is an American artist. And you can see this idea of levitation here. She's got a lot of things going on. I have to plug in my computer. So there's several things. You can see the hair on this girl floating. And you can see this giant flower. So we have a scale shift. So she has this giant flower in the middle of the walkway, and you see her playing with reality and maybe a lot of symbolism about the sleeping and perhaps fantasies of young girls. Very interesting work. Here's another Dorothea Tanning painting. So you see the sort of imagination and dream life of young girls and girls behaving wildly. So the women in their images, it really comes out differently, and the women weren't getting as much attention back in the day, but they have certainly gotten more attention now. And one of the videos that I put in the folder for you was from the Tate Museum, and it's just having a little look at Dorothea Tanning. She was one of the very few Americans. There's another one, Kay Sage, who were living in Europe and got exposed to surrealism and sort of jumped into the pool, full whole body. So surrealism, it was a literary and artistic movement founded by the poet André Breton in 1924. Many of the associated artists, such as Max Ernst and Jean Arp, had previously been involved with Dadaism. The movement sought to challenge conventions through the exploration of the subconscious mind, invoking the power of dreams and elements of change. Cultural hierarchies were challenged by the combination of diverse elements in collages and sculptural assemblages. The movement is also notable for the collaborations between artists and writers evident in the Surrealists' many publications. Okay, So that's just like a tiny little history blurb, probably from Wikipedia. I can't remember where I pulled that. I didn't write it. So the surrealists were always trying to make these really mysterious and dreamlike images. And you might ask, like, why were they doing that? Well, they had this very radical thing going on, and that was Hitler in the next country starting to take over Germany, um, and the whole like Nazi threat was extremely disturbing to them. Um, and as they watched, they started looking for a way to escape. Ah, my computer, I plugged it in. I'm so sorry. I have to leave this video and fix something. At least I left you something really interesting to look at. This computer is about to shut down. I'm going to lose all my work. I'm sure you can all sympathize with that. Oh, finally. It's going to charge. Okay. Sorry. I'm just going to leave that in there because I don't want to start and lose 12 minutes of work. Okay, so the images are very dreamlike. So one of the things the surrealists were doing was trying to evade the what it looked like was going to happen was Europe going to war. So they kind of just like tuned out, just like we've probably done with COVID. Like they just stayed in and they would have like slumber parties and they would sleep and they would uh, write down what they dreamt and they were like really egging each other on and they had all these party games. Some of you, we made Exquisite Corpses last year when they would play games that had a lot of chance in them where things, paper would get folded and passed around and they would try to create images that just had never been seen before. And here we have Rene Magritte. He's from Belgium. And so if they're not asleep, maybe they're like completely blinded, like these people whose heads are wrapped. This is probably one of the most famous paintings by Salvador Dali. It's not very big, this painting. It's just a little bit bigger than maybe about the size of your computer monitor, depending on your computer. And when you see it in person, it's very intimate and small. And I'm going to be asking you to put together some of these ideas into your own images and symbols. So if you see things you like, this is an encouragement to steal some of the ideas. So in this painting, we see Salvador Dali doing things like what we would call transformation. So we see like clocks that are usually, or watches that are usually rigid, they've gone floppy. So metal has gone floppy. And if you look at the figure on the sand, on the dark ground, it's kind of like somebody took the skin off his face and threw it on the ground or something. And the surrealists often would use these really kind of blank desert backgrounds so that you couldn't really figure out where the place was. They always had like kind of these empty, desert like, dreamy backgrounds. So one of my favorite surrealists is Rene Magritte. He's super inventive, and he had a day job where he went to work every day and he designed wallpaper. So he was like a really great at painting like wood grain and granite, and he was like able to fake almost any kind of texture. And then he would go home at night and paint his paintings where he included all those things. And so in this painting, we see the painting on the left, we see the double figure. So one of the ideas that comes up in surrealism is multiples. So when there's more than one of something that there normally would only be one of. Um, so it's not really like twins, it's really like two of the same person in the same place. Um, and then in the eye with the sky on the right, you see another idea, and that is the idea of transparency, or like where we have like windows into things that we wouldn't normally be able to see into. And sometimes when we can see into something, what is inside is not what we would expect to be inside. So I've given you a sheet that you can download out of the folder with these vocabulary words. So the surrealists used images that are irrational and have a dreamlike quality, and they were really trying to craft the feeling of being in a dream. So they used levitation, juxtaposition, scale change, transformation, multiples, dislocation, transparency, collage, and incongruity. And the idea of incongruity in surrealism is just like things that can't be reconciled. They call it the uncanny, like you feel like you know it, like kind of like deja vu. You feel like you've seen it before, but you don't really know it. It's this idea of things that, like a math problem that can't be solved. So, one of my favorite surrealist strategies is levitation, where things are not affected by gravity. And you'll see lots of things floating. And this one on these are both by Rene Magritte. And you'll see this may be multiples also, but not painted that well. Is it the same guy 5 times, or is it different guys that look alike? Sometimes the craft kind of messes up that idea. This is an artist, Leonora Carrington. She's a British artist from uh, England, but during World War II, she was living in France, and to escape the Nazis, she got on a boat and she ended up in Mexico, and she became a Mexican. She never came back to Europe. She and another artist, Remedios Varo, they just like took a one-way trip to Mexico and became Mexicans. So this is a painting done when she still lived in Europe, and it's very famous that it has the levitating horse in the background, and you'll see another horse running free. And I don't know if you can tell, but like her hair is supposed to be levitating also. And I would love to spend like 3 weeks talking about all these paintings with you, but I just want to give you a general introduction so that you can start using these surrealistic strategies. The animal she's sort of pointing at is hyena. And I know that because that's what she says it is when in some of her writing. So here's a very famous Salvador Dali painting with the rose levitating. It's called The Rose. And here's one of my paintings with levitating things. This painting is about Chinatown. So often we see juxtaposition, and juxtapositions where two things are placed together. And in surrealism, it's usually things that should not be together. Okay. And often there will be more than one thing happening with the way they're making a painting. So let's just look at the one on the left. We've got this train coming out of the chimney, and the train is obviously, there's a scale change in that. And scale change is something like, if I go back up to the rose, the if you look, there's just tiny people down here, and the rose, so the rose is huge. So one of the ideas the surrealists play with is making things either way too large or way too small. And so you'll see scale changes, like here we see this train that looks like it's a real train. It's got smoke and everything, but it's just in the wrong place. So that could be juxtaposition. It could be scale change. It it fits many of the descriptors. I'm sorry. Um, this could be transformation, because clouds are transformed into um, a woman, a tuba, and a chair. But it's also strangely, it's juxtaposition, because he put a woman, a tuba, and a chair together. So those three things are like randomly put together, and the symbols don't necessarily add up to something. And one of the things that Rene Magritte did is he loved to cover people's faces. So you'll see a person, and then their face is blocked. And I don't know if any of you have this experience, but when I have frustrating dreams, I cannot see people's faces. So that is something that happens in my own dreams, where I am like blocked from seeing people's faces. He's the one that painted the one earlier with the heads that are like wrapped with white fabric. So we also see scale changes. I mentioned that. So, like in this particular painting, we might look at the wallpaper that looks like clouds. It's almost like a transparency. We can see through the walls to what's outside. And then there is like a radical change in the objects, where their soap and the shaving brush and the glass and the comb almost become larger than human scale, if that bed is the right scale, or it's all in a dollhouse. We don't know. So now with something like Photoshop, we can like really mess with these ideas. These things are really easy to do in the computer. It's actually easier to do them in the computer than it is in drawing and painting, because in drawing and painting, we have to know how to draw these people and shade and do all this stuff. But we're gonna just throw it into the painting and see what happens. So this is another Rene Magritte playing with that idea of the apple being so big, it's the scale has changed and it just barely fits in the room. And Magritte, whenever something worked out for him, he would make many versions of it. So sometimes you'll see several versions of an idea from him, different variations, that because he's making money and he's just painting variants. Um, this is a contemporary artist. I'm sorry, I forgot her name, but she's sitting there with her dress lifted, and inside the dress is like a whole domestic dollhouse. So you'll see people playing with that idea of scale and transformation in contemporary art. Léonore Fini, she's French, and scale change, humans and cats being painted with like the same size bodies. I know there are large cats, but not these kind of cats. And I just really like this. It came out of a Vogue magazine, and you see they commissioned these giant gloves and shirts and things to put live models in with giant scale change. It's like a model with a giant shirt. So you'll see the ideas of surrealism in you see them all the time in advertising, movies. You know, I have a culture that really loves fantasy, and fantasy tends to have a lot of surreal devices. This was a really funny movie, The Science of Sleep, and there's all these like surrealistic fantasies in the movie. And at one point, this guy is fighting with his boss, and his hands grow huge. And so in surrealism, we see transformations, and that's turning one object into something new using an optical illusion. So I showed you like the optical illusion of the floppy metal clocks. And here we see boots transforming into shoes. If you look carefully at this, there's swans. And then look at the swans and what do they turn into in the reflection of the water? Maybe you can see another animal. Maybe you can just whisper it to yourself. What do you see? That last one and these ones are Salvador Dali, and he just painted amazingly, and he could make anything look like it was real because he has like mad skills. Um, Even making that eggshell look like there's a human stretching it. He's just a very interesting, very weird painter. So surrealism, like I said, it was they wrote surrealistic plays, short stories, poetry, and there were also sculptors, and this is Merritt Oppenheim, and she famously was a surrealist, and she was out having coffee with Picasso, and she described this piece, and he was like, "You got to go home and make it." And she went home and made um, ah, this is Salvador Dali. He is a great painter, but he also made a bunch of sculptures. So he played with this idea of the lobster telephone, white aphrodisiac telephone, 1936. And this is not the only one, so he made more than one. Transformation, this one is a modern digital image. I just really liked it, the way the wood is transforming into the body. So we still see people working with the surrealistic ideas. This is Dorothea Tanning, and look at that puppy's face. So that, Dorothea Tanning always had these like doors to nowhere, and then like they talk about like consciousness being like the opening of a door. So she has these random doors with kind of like weird, surreal robot type figures that aren't really explained. It's like she's making up like science fiction. Ah, this is Leonora Fini. It's called The Little Sphinx. And you can see the transformation is, I'm going to see if I can actually, the transformation here. Do you like my high-tech skills? Zooming in here. And holding my cat at the same time, who needs to be pet. Okay, she's like a little cat. She's a sphinx, so she's got like a cat paw, and you can see she's hunting. This is the bait, and she's got different things she's killed. So the idea of having like a murderous female animal was very exciting to the surrealists. So I'll put that back. Oh dear. So, like I said, easier to do in Photoshop than it is to do in drawing and painting. So we see it a lot in advertising. Here's Frida Kahlo, the little deer. And you'll notice this is like 1946. So some of these other paintings, these are like early 30s. And then you'll see Frida is 1946, so she is like way later. So I think she's seeing the surrealistic images through magazines and articles, and she's employing them later. So she's doing basically what I'm asking you to do. She's taking a good look at surrealist art and figuring out how she can use it for her own. And so that is going to be part of your assignment. I'm going to end this.